Dr. Mason West.
Welcome into this episode of Bare Bones. As always, I am Dr. Mason West. Hopefully today we get a little catharsis. The goal of today's show, we're really not going to talk about specifically the last game. We're not going to talk about, the playoffs. What we're going to do is, a slight reflection on last year and really how that blends into this offseason. The intention here is, a brief look ahead, the state of the roster, right? The state of the financials, the best that I can do, because the NFL salary cap and all that is a whole other beast that, smarter people than I deal with. But essentially, what are we looking at, as we're starting to roll into the postseason mode, off-season mode? The thing that is really cool about today and this week is there's all this head coaching news that's flying around, and the Bears really, there's nothing, they're not part of this. It's fantastic, right? Obviously, last year there was the what's going to happen with the Ben Johnson situation. The 1 year anniversary was, a couple days ago for that. There was also, go back 2 years, the conversation of, do the Bears keep Eberflus? Should they leave, move on from him now? Do they wait? Obviously, they ended up sticking with Matt Eberflus. It's a constant thing in Chicago Bears world. The conversations around the coach in the negative way, or in a we're trying to find a new one way. It's nice to have an off season where you're not having any of that conversation. Now, what probably would be good to bring up before we move on to some of the, we're going to dive into some of the press conference quotes. Oh, and by the way, obviously, Danny's not here today. He's got some family stuff to deal with, so you get solo Mason today. Before we dive into some of the press conference stuff, there are some coaching changes to talk about, right? Yes, there's no head coach discussion, but already a couple things going on. So first, the big thing that came out earlier this week, Eric Bieniemy is no longer the Bears running back coach. He is now the offensive coordinator for the Kansas City Chiefs. Kansas City Chiefs, 2 electric boogaloo for him. Matt Nagy, that's a whole thing in terms of what's going on with Nagy there. But essentially, right, he is no longer the offensive coordinator of the Chiefs, and he is was looking at some head coach opportunities, but in all reality, probably looking for an offensive coordinator position at this point elsewhere. So you need to start looking at running back coaches. And there's a couple of interesting ones out there. That Deuce Staley would be one. Most recently, running backs coach for the Browns. Before that was with the Panthers. He chose to go to Carolina as a part of that unit, just as a part. It was closer to his family, his mother, I believe, in particular. That's why he ended up going down there, specifically also with an assistant head coach title. But before that, right, he was with the Lions, and so Ben Johnson knows him. If we're looking for a running backs coach that is fiery, right, kind of that hard-nosed, what you saw at Bieniemy in a lot of those training camp videos, Deuce Staley would be a good example of that. That brings into question, I don't think he got along the best with DeAndre Swift when they were with the Lions, but that doesn't mean that they can't now. So, there's that. Another one might be Scotty Montgomery. Previously, he was a running backs coach and assistant head coach for the Detroit Lions. That's a connection that, to Ben Johnson. So there's a couple of examples of those. Something that is happening. Boston College offensive coordinator Will Lawing is set to depart the program with the Bears as his landing spot. Before Boston College, Lawing worked for teams like New England Patriots, Houston Texans, and Alabama. He's got a background in tight ends, so one might imagine, even though that position technically isn't currently open, that he would end up as the tight ends coach for the Bears. He was actually Johnson's teammate back at UNC. A couple other pieces of news, nothing official yet in terms of changes, but with potential changes on the horizon. Packers interviewed defensive backs coach Al Harris yesterday for their defensive coordinator job. The Washington Commanders have also looked at Al Harris. Dan Quinn is seeking a DC, and the two worked together previously in Dallas. So, you're looking at potentially maybe a new defensive backs coach. That would be an absolute shame, because obviously Al Harris did a pretty exceptional job. We saw Nashawn Wright, who he had as an Al Harris had connections with, have a great year in terms of turnovers. Um, we the thing that would suck with that too is we wouldn't really get to see Al Harris fully working with the guys like Kyler Gordon, with guys like Jalen Johnson, just because they were hurt so much of the year. Now, obviously, they came back at the end of the year, but I would love to see those guys, really get to work with Al for a whole offseason training camp and then throughout the entire year. Um, It'll be interesting to see what would happen there, though. It seems like guys like maybe like a Tyreek Stevenson might have been a little in the doghouse, whether that was a Dennis Allen or an Al Harris thing. We'll dive into what the roster might look like and how important Tyreek Stevenson is going forward here. And then just clearly also great relationship with Kevin Byard. Again, we'll also dive into a little Kevin Byard conversation here, but um, that whole secondary was great. So if you lose Al Harris, that would be a bummer. But I mean, he's a guy that deserves also a defensive coordinator shot. I'm just hoping we get one more year with him. Last one of these, Eagles have requested to interview Bears offensive coordinator Declan Doyle for their offensive coordinator position. Doyle was hired last offseason as the NFL's youngest offensive coordinator, and he previously coached under Sean Payton in New Orleans and Denver. I would think that this is more of a information gathering. This seems, it's a year too early for Doyle. Like I mentioned, I mean, he was the youngest offensive coordinator left this last year. He didn't call plays, anything of that nature. So if the Eagles were to do this, right, I mean, Sirianni doesn't call plays for them. Whoever they're bringing in would do so. I mean, and we have seen this. The Jets hired Tanner Engstrom, who basically the idea there is the Sean McVay joke. He had a cup of coffee with Ben Johnson and got the offensive coordinator job with the Jets, which has not been great so far. But yeah, I think this is more information gathering than anything. The Eagles probably just want a little bit of a knowledge of what went on in that Bears coaches rooms, the locker room, and all that jazz, trying to take a little bit of that magic. I would think that the Eagles are going to go for something a little more tenured for that position, but something to keep an eye on for sure. Okay, couple of quotes to talk about here. Ryan Poles said that Ozzy Trapilla and Noah Sewell have both had surgery. Poles didn't have an exact timeline for Trapilla. Really unfortunate because he was coming along, said Poles. He did have some timelines, right? He thought that guys like Shamar Turner were going to be available. So when you specifically say, like, yeah, Shamar Turner should be available for our off-season work, but then he doesn't have a timeline for Ozzy Trapilla, it's not a good sign. So you're going into, and we'll dive more specifically on this later, but you're going into 2026 needing an answer at left tackle, even if it's a temporary answer. So that's just something to keep in mind. Bears coach Ben Johnson said on the 2025 season, it wasn't good enough. There is no building off of this. It's back to the bottom. I appreciate that mentality because I think far too often, it doesn't matter what level you're talking about. I mean, you could go as low as, junior or junior high, middle school football, high school programs, college, and definitely in the NFL, where when you have players that are coming back for another year, this conversation of let's build on what we have, but especially college and the NFL, and we're going to touch on this, but there's so much turnover that happens on that roster. And well, yes, there's going to be guys there who were here last year and understood what the training camps were like in terms of intensity and understood what the culture was for the team. You're going to have a lot of guys that also now have to learn that. So it's not just, all right, we're bringing the whole band back together, even if you're keeping a lot of your key pieces. Ben Johnson also said on the Bears offense, we haven't even scratched the surface of what we're fully capable yet. But he did also say that they have to be better specific at catching the football and that'll be a point of emphasis starting in the spring. He was really proud of the physicality they played with from the trenches, from wide receivers to DBs, and the poise they showed late in games. All of that is true, right? I think most people would agree that really this offense in particular is nowhere near its final form. While it was great with explosives, led the league consistently in explosives and those big chunk plays. As Ben said, they hunt explosives. The consistency was not there. You saw that down to down. You saw that in there, Caleb Williams' CPOE, completions percentage over expected, stat there. You also saw it in terms of success rate. The Bears did not have a great success rate, and that shows that inconsistency. So imagine if you have a team that can still hunt for explosives, but you can raise that success rate 5 to 10% even. That's going to drastically change the ceiling for this offense. Already mentioned like the catching. That was a problem. You saw that. I mean, yes, it was an elements game in terms of that game against the Rams. It was a bit disheartening that it seemed like the elements affected the Bears pass catchers more than it did the Rams pass catchers. You'd think that that was something that was a point of emphasis and also just something that you'd be better at. Having played in, I mean, all kinds of weather. They played in rainstorms. They played in cold. They played in snow, hot. I mean, like any weather that you can think of, the Bears played in. Yet drops were a problem, specifically in that game, and then all year, right? I mean, like the stats been flowing around all season regarding Caleb Williams. How many yards he lost to drops this past year. So more time on the jugs machine, and other point of emphasis as well for that. The last point, going back to that, was the physicality and the poise. There's something special when your wide receivers are willing to stick their nose in there and dig out a safety or even chip on an end. You see guys like Puka Nakua, speaking of the Rams, do that all the time, but you don't see entire teams block the way that I feel that the Bears were able to. A big difference in that Rams game in the positive from the DBs was a willingness to tackle. Right, Kyler Gordon is a fantastic and very physical tackler. Jaquan Brisker, I mean, he had the game of his career, if we're being honest. I mean, he had a whole series that he wiped out by himself, basically, between his coverage and his tackling ability. And then even Jalen Johnson, who at times has been a reluctant tackler, I think was more consistent this year, even with the injury. So that was something that was great and that you hope to see continue. Ben Johnson was asked about the interception. Like, this is probably the only thing specifically from the game that we're going to talk about. Just the fact that he said that he didn't look at the tape yet. They were doing all the exit interviews, and that he said that if there is a miscommunication on the play, that's on him. It just goes back to the accountability thought process. Previous coaches were not as accountable. One of the reasons that they're not here anymore, no longer the head coach of the Chicago Bears, but consistently Ben Johnson has been the guy that, yes, he's willing to call out certain players and certain groups that need to be called out. But at the same time, he's going to own his. The last thing regarding the kind of the coaches and all that jazz, but going higher up, the Falcons did request to interview Ian Cunningham. This is a weird place to be because the NFL has said that essentially because of the wording and the nature of the Falcons' job, that the Bears would not get draft compensation because it's not considered a promotion. Even if you pull back the curtain and you look at exactly what the job is, I mean, it's the GM job. But the way that it's set up, the Falcons created this weird situation. Now, I don't think the Bears clearly aren't going to block this. It just would look terrible to block Ian Cunningham, going to the Falcons. What I do think has to be done is that a conversation to be had of like, hey, Falcons from the Bears, you need to have a conversation with league office and highlight how this is a promotion. Like, you are hiring Ian to be your general manager and football decision maker, even if Matt Ryan is there. Now, because I you just don't think that's not a George McCaskey vibe. That's not a Ryan Poles vibe. Even Ben Johnson, he did talk about the coaches being requested, the slips being submitted. He said that he was pumped about it. He is seeing a bunch of future position coaches, coordinators, head coaches on this coaching staff. And I think when you're a good teacher, when you're someone who cares about the people that work under you and with you, you want them to, take these next steps. So selfishly, as a Bears fan, I still hope they figure out a way to get those picks. For example, the Bears had traded away a 4th round pick to get Joe Thuney, which was a fantastic trade. I mean, do that 1,000 times out of 1,000, but you still want to recoup some of those losses because I believe they only have 6 picks. And so, Ryan Poles is pretty good about moving around in the draft to gain more capital, more bites at the apple, but having some extra third rounders would be real nice. All right, quick break here, and then we're going to go to the next part of our show. All right, looking ahead. First things first, players that are free agents. So I'm going to run through the entire list because some of these names are very important to consider here, even if it's further down the roster. Because if we're being honest, those are the biggest changes, right? Yes, big players will move, and whether it's through a trade, through cuts, through ending of contract, but the biggest churning happens at the end of the roster, and those players, as we saw this year, are very important, right? I mean, how deep did the Bears have to go in defensive back? How deep did the Bears have to go for their linemen, for their receivers, for all of that matters. So, in no particular order, this is just the order that's on Spot Track. Kevin Byard, Joe Tryon, Ryan Bates, Andrew Billings, Chris Williams, Durham Smythe, Jonathan Owens, Case Keenum, Jaquan Brisker, Travis Homer, Olamide Zaccheaus, Nick McLeod, Jalen Jones, Scott Daly, the long snapper, Devin Duvernay, Nashawn Wright, Noah Sewell, Daniel Hardy, Jordan McFadden, DeMarco Jackson, Braxton Jones, Dominique Robinson, Elijah Hicks, Theo Benedict. It's a lot of names. So the ones that stand out the most, or at least right away, is probably your safety group. And sorry if we jump around on this a little bit, but this is all kind of just like a blop for the most part in terms of what the thought process is going to be. It's more of a holistic roster conversation. But so for safety, right? I mean, you're Kevin Byard, Jaquan Brisker, so your two starting safeties would need deals, and then you can go further down the roster, right? And you're going to have Jalen Jones, and you're going to also have Jonathan Owens. So Elijah Hicks is really the only guy you have there. Kevin Byard was pretty upfront. He wants to be back. Ryan Poles is pretty upfront. He wants Kevin to be back. I don't think there's much to discuss there. They're going to be. I think Kevin gets brought back. Oh, sorry. Another name too that's not listed here that's popped in my head is also CJ Gardner-Johnson. He's also not going to be a free agent. I don't know why he's not on this list. I love Brisker to be back. I really would, but I think he probably is going to be too expensive. He showed he can be healthy this year. That's one of the biggest things for him and concerns for him. He is a good, strong safety. He just isn't necessarily maybe a great, strong safety because he doesn't create a ton of turnovers, and that's really where you get paid on is either if you're a defensive back or cornerback shutting down part of the field or taking the ball away. But his willingness to stick his nose in there. I already mentioned that one drive that he just basically took the entire Rams drive away. I would love to somehow get him back. CJ Gardner-Johnson is more likely, but he played very well this year. Just another situation where he may have priced himself into a better deal. Unless if he loves being here and loves Chicago, maybe you can get him back. Jonathan Owens, I would expect to find probably a better deal elsewhere. I mean, he was, left over from the Eberflus era. So a lot of times, I mean, you're going to see a ton of turnover. Even if a player is a good player, if you're Dennis Allen, if you're the position coaches, you want your guys. So, some of these people who, even if they might be good and, what they do, you're going to see a change there. Just another small one that people may not be thinking of is Ryan Bates. I mean, he really was actually your backup center. So what does that look like? Are you trying to bring him back on a small deal? Everyone knows Ryan Poles loves Ryan Bates, in terms of the number of times he was trying to get him. Other guys, Chris Williams, even though he came in the Matt Eberflus era, but he was brought in by Ryan Poles, a late trade to try to shore up that defensive line. Andrew Billings has been here for a while, but his impact was not felt as much this year as it was in other years. I assume Case Keenum is going to get brought back because he was just such a good resource for Caleb, and he's not going to be expensive. I mean, he's a almost 38-year-old quarterback who isn't really going to be your true backup for anyone. Durham Smythe was a very usable tight end. Now, do you want to? He's 30. He'll be still 30 before the season officially kicks off. But is that a guy you want to spend money on and bring back? I mean, he was one of the first signings for the Bears. So actually, I wouldn't be surprised if you did, unless you wanted to try and infuse that with youth. But again, you don't have a ton of draft picks. I think Olamide Zaccheaus is brought back. And I think that's the case because we'll dive into this later, maybe a little of the DJ Moore question. And also due to Rome's health, I think Rome will be fine going into next year. But I think the staff clearly likes Zaccheaus. He knows multiple positions and he's a very useful player when he can catch the ball. So I wouldn't be surprised if also just for money wise, because we'll talk about this in a little bit, but money wise, you're not swimming in cash. So that's going to matter. We're not going to talk about every single player here, by the way, but then the next kind of elephant in the room is Nahshon Wright. I would assume he priced himself out of Chicago, just in terms of how he played. And also that's the thing too, and this is where the Tyreek Stevenson conversation comes up. You're hoping Jalen Johnson with a full summer rehab is back closer to his former self because he was definitely not that this year. Nahshon, while he was a turnover machine, also on a down-to-down basis was not a very good cornerback. Take the Lions game. I mean, he was just got abused by Amon-Ra. I mean, and a lot of cornerbacks do. So that's not even anything necessarily against him, but is that a guy that you have to pay? A 27-year-old corner who, was on practice squads all over and things of that nature. So I assume will be gone. I'd love to see DeMarco Jackson brought back. Just some names that stand out to me and also Dominique Robinson. I don't know that anyone's pounding the table for Dominique Robinson, but he did make enough splash plays this last year. The question just ends up becoming, is there enough roster space for him? And depending on some other moves that you make, whether that's in the draft or potentially even, in the trade market. Back to DeMarco Jackson, guys, your TJ Edwards is going to be on the older side. He's in his 30s, coming off a major ankle fracture and surgery. So I just think also, and he did really well this year when he played. Now, not like a top 10 linebacker or something, but you didn't notice him in a bad way. And then one of the last ones I want to touch on in terms of some of these free agents is that combo of Braxton Jones and Theo Benedict. So right now, Ozzy's hurt. Braxton and Theo are both free agents. So what are you doing going into next year? If the roster is how it sits, you're either keeping Tooney at left tackle or you're starting Karan Amagaji, who was hurt all year. And when he played last year was not very good. So that just begs the question. I would love to see one of those guys brought back. Braxton probably gets a deal that he gets to truly compete for a start somewhere was my guess, even though he didn't play really at all this year. But I think there's enough good tape of him out there that a team will take a chance on that and just do that at left tackle. So I think Theo Benedict. Oh, sorry, I was wrong. Elijah Hicks is a free agent. Whoops. So yeah, your safety room is bare. Theo Benedict is probably the one you're more likely to be able to bring back, partially just because of his status. And status matters for a lot of these teams. Were you a first round pick, were you a fifth round pick, were you an undrafted free agent? Teams remember that. And honestly, a lot of teams just really dust off some of their old scouting things from draft time too, which it's kind of crazy. Anyway, so Theo is probably the one you're more likely to be able to bring back as an undrafted free agent who did struggle in pass protection at times this year. He's probably brought back. Now, the question after that becomes, well, what is your answer at left tackle? There's not a lot of great options, if we're being honest. One, I think it's about resource allocation. And you spend a second round pick on Ozzy Trapillo. A bad team, right, will just grit their teeth and bear it and say, well, we spent this money or this draft pick or money, depending on the situation. And so we have to make this work. But at the same time, Ozzy was making strides, but you cannot guarantee he will not be ready to start the season. And you can't guarantee that he's going to come back as his old self. So you need to have some answers. If your answer is not Theo Benedict, or at least if you're not comfortable with that, if your answer is not a Braxton Jones, if you can't bring him back, you could look into signing a guy like Cam Robinson, right? I mean, he last played for the Browns, cost 12 mil, probably would be around the same thing, if not a little less. Josh Nyman is an example, old Packer, but now is on the Panthers. He's a guy that could give you reps at both sides. Was only 4 mil. Kelvin Beachum, left tackle. He's older, 36, but with the Cardinals, without good 4 mil. Josh Jones, mainly a right tackle, but can give you a little left tackle snaps. 28-year-old was with Seattle, 4 mil there. So there are individuals that you could go out and get as a stopgap and just go into camp with. Again, you're going in with, let's just say, Josh Nyman, Theo Benedict, and you have technically Karan still on the roster, and you say, all right, best man wins. Now, I'm not super comfortable with that. Don't love it, but that's the situation you're in when honestly the money is not, you're not super flush with cash, you're not flush with draft capital, and you do have some other needs. All right, a couple other things to talk about here. Another elephant in the room, DJ Moore. DJ Moore was not in the locker room when the media was allowed in for interviews at the end of the game. He was not someone that spoke during locker cleanout, and Ben Johnson was non-committal on his comments in that press conference regarding DJ Moore, as was Ryan Poles. This has been kind of said all year. I would expect DJ Moore is traded away, and you're probably only getting like a 5th round pick for him. That's not to say he's not a capable and good receiver. The problem just is, even though he improved, right? He improved with his route running a bit. His effort was definitely better. He was a more willing blocker as the year went on. All of these things are true. And he made some huge catches for the Bears, right? The game-winning touchdown with the Packers. Multiple catches in that Rams game, along with, he had that one amazing one-handed catch against the Rams. But there is something to be said where he has a very limited route tree, that there are games that he was just a ghost, even if when Rome wasn't even available and he wasn't necessarily racking in the targets. And you do have to have a conversation about that final play, right? Now you can say, multiple things can be true at once. That was not the throw you had to throw if you're Caleb. It was 2nd down and 8. And this is really the only thing on the Rams game that I'm going to specifically dive into. It was 2nd and 8, lived to fight another down. You had someone open down in the flat, and you got to kind of know who you're, KYP, know your personnel. And you can also say, DJ, that you need to be able to read the coverage better. Even if your route was technically supposed to be, higher up the field, you got to see what's happening and flatten that route out. You need to run at 100%. Because even if DJ doesn't catch that, just be in the zip code so that because that ball was bobbled by Cam Curl, punch it out. Honestly, you can say the same thing about Luther Burden. Luther Burden just stood there and watched as the ball was bobbling, but I digress. So, and really, 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 at the end of the day, you just can't be paying DJ Moore what you're paying him. So if you look at the top cap hits for 2026, the number one cap hit against your roster right now was DJ Moore at a $28.5 million cap hit. That's 9.37, nearly 10% of your cap going to a receiver that most games was your wide receiver 2, sometimes wide receiver 3. You just can't do that. That can't be the case, especially when there are other holes to fill. You need work at edge. You have to figure out what you're doing at safety. What's your cornerback 2 situation? You do need you're going to create a hole, and you have to get a wide receiver. Your defensive interior needs work. So linebacker is a question mark. What you're going to do there? So long story short, I expect DJ Moore to be traded. Not anything to say about him as a talented player, just in terms of what he's being paid and ultimately his role on this roster. And that has run out. While we're talking about cap hits, like I said, DJ Moore, biggest cap hit. In the next in order, you have Montez Sweat at 25 mil, Jalen Johnson at 25 mil, Joe Tooney at 21.5, Dio Adengbo at 20.5, Jonah Jackson at 19.5, Grady Jarrett at 19. A couple of those names that stand out: Montez Sweat, Dio Adengbo, Grady Jarrett. So Montez Sweat is a bit separated from this. He did play well the second half of the season, and particularly in the playoffs. Now, all of the counting stats may not be there in terms of the sacks, but his pressures were better and he impacted games. I'd like more out of him as an edge for edge one, but that you're getting what you're getting. The two, though, that are the big issue are Dio Adengbo and Grady Jarrett. Now, Grady, again, played a bit better in the back half of the year when he got healthier, but 19 mil is a lot to be paying that guy for not having more impact on the game. He does a lot as a leader. He does a lot as a voice in the locker room. And, again, there was a couple of plays, like he had a batted ball in the Rams game, I recall. But that's a problem. The biggest problem is Dio Adengbo. You're paying him 20.5 mil, and that's for, I believe, one sack against a backup left tackle in week 1. Even before he got hurt, he was not playing well. But there's nothing you can do about it. If you end up looking at the structure of Dio Adengbo's contract, right? It's a 3-year contract, and you really don't have a potential out until making sure I have it until 2027. Because of that $20.5 million cap hit. Now in 2027, you could cut him and it would only be 4.5 against the cap. But until then, you got to live with it. A couple other contracts to have a conversation about, and the reason I'm bringing all this up is when you look at the Bears cap space currently as it sits, they're $4 million over the cap. It's just a reminder that the Bears paid for this roster, right? The current one they have. I mentioned already a bunch of those names. Your 2 starting guards, you're paying a pretty penny to in the top 10 for your team. Your starting center is a free agent signing that you're paying pretty highly. Your nickel and Kyle Gordon, you're paying highly. I already mentioned Jalen Johnson's name. You can just list all this stuff. You paid for this team. It isn't like a good example would be the Patriots. The Patriots are in the AFC Championship game, and they have $31 million of cap space. So they're going to be able to take at a minimum, AFC Championship level team, if not maybe a Super Bowl team, depending on what goes on against the Broncos. I mean, the Broncos are another example. They have 27 mil. So these are teams that are going to have wiggle room to say, hey, here are 2 holes we have, 3 holes we have. How and where do we fill these holes? We have the money to do so. So the Bears have to be creative in terms of creating more space. So the Bears, if you go further than that, if the Bears are, if anything, 13 mil over the cap when accounting for signing draft class and filling to 51-man roster. So you add in another $10 million for some wiggle room. And by the way, a lot of these current numbers I got from Jonathan Wood. You should follow him on Twitter. It's a fan. He does a great job. He did a whole thing on this. So go check him out. So they're really going to need to clear about $23 million to be good. So if you trade DJ Moore, you can save $16.5 million against the cap. The name I haven't said yet, cutting Edmonds. If you cut Edmonds, you save $15 million. He was having a very good season, arguably, if not maybe even kind of great in terms of the turnovers. The problem is you're paying him a lot of money to not feel him as much as you like to feel someone that you're paying that much money. And I think you saw that especially in the playoffs where there wasn't enough plays. He was taken out of the run game too easily. He doesn't have the instincts that you'd like out of him. And again, he's making, $17 million. He's 5.73 against the cap. That's just too much for your linebacker that is not a top 5 linebacker. Comparatively, so I said he's 17. Fred Warner is at 21. Roquan Smith is not too far behind in both those categories. He's at 20. Tremaine Edmonds is the third highest paid linebacker in the league, and he just doesn't play that way. So the issue though is if you cut Edmonds and you have Edwards with his injury, you put the middle of your defense in a bit of a quandary. So you have to be smart about how you handle that because you're probably going to have to, again, can you bring back DeMarco Jackson? Is there another linebacker that you can pay and not be paying $17 million to? And is there someone in the draft? Unfortunately, Kurt, as things have gone, Hippolyte has not done anything. He has been active pretty much every single week, and then the 1 week that he was active, he got hurt immediately, and so you cannot count on him to give you anything. So that there's a bit of a question mark there, but again, cutting Edmonds does save you $15 million. So with the trade of DJ, cutting of Edmonds, that gives him about $8 million over minimum level signings for agency. Anything else would come from restructures. So restructure candidates would be Jonah Jackson, Drew Dahlman, Kyler Gordon. If you restructure those, you can open up $26 million, bringing them to about $34 million in actual cap space, not accounting for an additional $10 million for in-season moves, signing draft class, and filling in the 51. I'm pretty sure all of these moves, and Jonathan Jay Wood said the same thing. That he thinks all of those moves would happen. And if you want to be like really aggressive in free agency, you need more than that. So that would be more restructures. So for example, like if you restructure Montez Sweat, that'd free up another $15.8 million. And you could also do Tooney, that'd be another $11.9 million. The Bears have only used one restructure and 0 contracts have dummy years attached to it. So when you talk about the cap being fake in the NFL, there's a bit of a reality to that, but you have to be both creative and you have to have an owner that's willing to pay some money. So far in history, the Bears ownership has not been necessarily one willing to pay a lot of money in terms of guarantees and some of these other things. Part of that is I would describe them as football poor, right? Their money is the Bears. It's not the Broncos ownership that owns Walmart and can throw that money around. It's not Jerry Jones and his oil money. So when you have, that issue, it's harder to do that. And the other thing again is creativity and need. The Bears really haven't had players that makes a lot of sense to be like, hey, we're going to put on them all these void years, but you're hitting that time period, especially with some other decisions to make that. I mean, you need to, although I mentioned Tyler Stevenson, but I didn't mention that. I mean, you need to make a decision on him soon in terms of, are you extending him or not? And then you're going to have Caleb Williams. That's looming in the background. So anyway, with simple restructures alone, the Bears can clear close to $88 million, and that doesn't account for max restructures, cuts, or trades. So they could get to $60 million to spend while still leaving room to sign draft picks, fill the 51 minimum players, and then have $10 million in wiggle room for in-season moves fairly easily. They'll be fine. So that's just kind of like the money rundown that I wanted to talk about. Again, go check out Jay Wood. Jonathan Wood did a whole write-up on this, I think, and he's a much smarter man than I when it comes to the cap and management of that. But for those who are worried about the cap, don't be necessarily worried about it. They can create a lot of space and still maintain the integrity of their roster. A couple other things just to highlight. For the 2026 NFL season, the Chicago Bears face the toughest strength of schedule based on their 2025 opponent records. So they're around 0.550 in terms of that win-loss record there. The biggest reason for this is because of the NFC North, right? I mean, the Packers have the 3rd hardest strength of schedule. The Vikings have the 11th hardest, and the Lions have the 27th. The Lions have the 27th also because they're the 4th place team, so that really brings them down. But when those 4 teams, the Bears, the Packers, the Vikings, the Lions, just have to beat up on each other, it's hard for everyone involved in that. One person I didn't bring up in terms of a cut is Cole Kmet. Stop it. Stop trying to cut Cole Kmet. It's been happening the last couple of years. It happened when the Bears drafted Colson Loveland. I think you saw how important Cole Kmet is. Just in terms of what he brings to the field, first of all, his run blocking is very good. His versatility in that is very good. the fact that, I mean, there's not a lot of tight ends that can. He was one-on-one blocking Jared Verse this past week. There's not a lot of guys that can do that, and still go out and run routes. It's not like it's not Colson Loveland level of running routes. It's not Trey McBride, right? It's not George Kittle, but it's it's pretty dang good. And I think the other layer to it too is he's actually tied for seventh in terms of what you're paying tight end wise. He's at 12.5 million, tied with Jake Ferguson. And when you look where he's sandwiched between, so he's just below Mark Andrews, and David Njoku. He's just above guys like Jonnu Smith, Dalton Schultz, Evan Ingram, and Jawan Johnson. I'd much rather have Cole Kmet at 12.5 million than even right now. I mean, like, he's had a really kind of a funky year. Dallas Goedert at 10, because Cole Kmet does stuff that Dallas doesn't in the blocking game, in the run game. And the amount of 12 and 13 personnel the Bears ran, that was important. Now, I know someone will point and say, well, to run block, can you draft someone? Can you find someone cheaper that can just run block? But again, it's the combination. It's a combination of what he can do as a pass catcher, as a run blocker. Also, just what he is on this team. I mean, he's one of the longest tenured Bears on this team at this point. And just in terms of that leadership, his durability, he rarely misses time. I think that one he missed this year was his first one, if I recall correctly. But it's just, long story short, stop trying to cut Cole Kmet. There's going to be a time down the road, but when you're going to be transitioning a bit, where again, I expect DJ Moore to be gone. So now you're going to have Rome, Luther Burden, you're going to have Colson Loveland as kind of your main three pass catchers. Maybe you bring Olamide Zaccheaus back and draft a day 3 guy. Cole is important there. All right, that's pretty much all I have to talk about here. I just want to give a rundown on some of the quotes from the week, a rundown on the cap conversation situation, and a thought process on just some of the impending free agents. I did not want to dive into too much of, potential free agent signings or draft talk. We're going to have tons of time for draft talk. Bare Bones is going to take a little break at this point, just kind of reset after a long year, a good year, if we're being honest. But, a couple weeks, 2-3 weeks, we will be back. We're going to be doing our mock drafts, and we're going to try to get as many of those done between now and when the draft happens. You could also look forward. The plan is to try to do an in-person draft party for the first day of that draft. There a bar in Chicago, hopefully, and we'd love to have as many people there as possible. Potentially some giveaways, talk with y'all, have a good time. So go ahead, and if you've made it this far in the show, if you could, leave a comment. Would you want to come out to a draft show? Would you be there? Because that'll also give an idea of, how hard out we want to push to make this happen. So yeah, comment on below. Go to YouTube if you're listening to the podcast. Once you're done driving and you end up at your location you're heading to, go to YouTube and leave, hey, yeah, I'd love to come to a draft show, something of that nature. Just get an idea. But thank you everyone for a great 2025-2026 Chicago Bears season. This sounds corny as heck, but y'all are what make it happen. Everyone who's watching at home, listening at home, I can't thank y'all enough for being willing to sit there and listen to me spout off about the Bears. And my patients appreciate it because it means I don't have to talk to them so much about it. I get to talk to you guys about it. You really make this doable. And I really, from the bottom of my heart, I appreciate it. So thank you for this journey. And you know what? I'm excited for next year. This is one of the first, even like 2018 was great, but 2019 had a weird buzz feeling to it. It was more, I feel like, grasping at straws and hoping that you're going to take a step. This year, it's just a different feeling. It's not like an if they'll take a step, but a when they take that step. And we dive super heavy into this. We'll do so as the off season continues. But people who are worried about regression, you shouldn't be, because you have your quarterback, you have your head coach. Your head coach and your GM are in lockstep in terms of how they're trying to build this roster. You have a dynamic pass catcher and a matchup nightmare in Colson Loveland. You have some hope with Roma Dunze. Just, hopefully it was just really the injury that slowed him down, and can he get back to, the guy that was starting to really head towards 1,000 yards at the beginning of the year. And you're going to have another whole offseason where Dennis Allen hopefully gets to really pick his guys to really shape this defense, and that you don't have to depend on turnover luck in order to make stops, that you're truly setting the tone, kind of like you did in that Rams game. But again, thank you everyone. Bear down.